Hi, everyone. I am Allie Ball. I am the founder of Retail Ready and the host of the Biz Wiz podcast. I'm a former grocery buyer, head of grocery, and retail store manager at Buy Right Market here in San Francisco, turned wholesale consultant. I'm so excited to be here with you today, along with my colleague, Charlie Birkinshaw, to help you through the foundations that you need to succeed with your packaged product business.
And hello, everybody. My name is Charlie Birkinshaw. I am a Retail Ready alumnus. I'm also the founder of my own CPG company called Element Shrub. And I am working with Allie as the VP of Student Success here at the Food Biz Wiz, where I provide students with that sort of producer perspective.
So together, Charlie and I support emerging food, beverage, and taxable grocery brands with their wholesale strategy within Retail Ready, our online course. So through our private course platform, bi-weekly group coaching calls, a 24/7 private student online community, and a whole lot more, we help brands understand how to get on retail shelves and how to have high sales once you do. So we can tell you how you can keep in touch with us at the very end of this training. So we've got about 60 minutes of information for you today. So let's get right to it. So here is what we're going to cover for you guys. We are going to talk through what to think about as you develop your product so you can make sure that you develop your product, your brand, your that promise that you make to your consumers. We're going to do a high-level overview of your financials so that you can make sure you're actually making money with your packaged product line. From there, yeah, Charlie, I love that you're laughing because that's like the key here, right? Making money. From there, we're going to talk through determining where you're going to sell. We're going to discuss some things to keep in mind as you consider selling direct to consumer, through wholesale accounts, selling online, or in brick and mortar locations, plus diving a bit into the pros and cons of each of those sales channels. Then we'll talk about an overview of the moving parts of each of those channels and how you can navigate all of the players within your supply chain and in those sales channels. And then finally, we're going to discuss what you can do to move forward with your packaged product and what to do next.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we're just trying to give you a better sort of awareness of all of the different moving parts for launching and growing your packaged food business. And, to give you a better sense of, what questions to ask, who to turn to for support, and kind of what to take into consideration, right, when you're launching your brand. Now, obviously, we can't talk through every single possible question that you might have, in the next hour. But we're going to give you a very high level overview and just sort of like a roadmap for success. So I think branding is probably a good place to start. Allie, do you want to kick things off?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So one of the questions that comes up over and over again within our Retail Ready community is asking producers, asking you guys, do you have a brand or do you simply have a product line? And that's what I want to highlight for you guys first. It is really easy to have a product line and mistakenly think that you have a brand here. So what do I mean when I ask that question, right? So a product line is simply a set of products that you sell. It might be something like we sell mint chip ice cream, strawberry ice cream, chocolate ice cream, and pistachio ice cream. That is your product line. You have 4 SKUs. A brand, however, is the personality and the promise behind that lineup of those 4 flavors. It is everything that goes into the development and the sale of your products. So from the logo to the colors to the fonts and your visual identity on your packaging to your voice on social media to where you decide to sell or where you decide not to sell your products to your price point and how you market your products. So all of that goes into building your brand. Your brand is your business's personality and your company culture, and it's infused in everything that you do. So remember, people buy brands, not product lines. If you want to develop a loyal customer base of repeat purchasers, you've got to focus on building a brand.
And
So
Allie,
yeah.
I was just going to jump in here. I think if you're sort of having trouble distinguishing between these two, I think Trader Joe's is an interesting like example of like Trader Joe's is clearly its own brand, right?
Yep.
But within the Trader Joe's sort of universe or grocery store, there are a bunch of products, like product lines that they sell that are being given to them by other brands, but those brands are not represented on their
Mm,
shelf. It's the Trader
yeah.
Joe's brand that is represented. So, a product line is almost more like a commodity, right? And then the
Hmm.
brand is like all that personality that comes along with it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way to articulate it. And I think Charlie, I know why this is challenging at the beginning, right? Because as a producer, you spend so much time thinking about the product development, right?
Totally.
How am I
Yeah.
going to make it? What's it going to taste like? Like how am I literally going to produce this product? And then the brand, it feels like you've done the branding work. Like you've already put so much thought into it, but you've really just scratched the surface if you focus solely on the product development.
Totally. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got 3 questions that our listeners can ask themselves long before you guys start selling your products. So let me review the 3 and we'll dive a little bit deeper into each. So first one is, what problem am I solving? Second one is, why am I different? And the third one is, who is my target audience? So that first question that I want you to answer is, what is the need that your product is filling, or what is the problem that your product is solving? So from there, we want to dig in deeper. What do you hear people saying about this problem? What is the specific vocabulary that they use? Later in your business growth, you are going to use these words and phrases as you develop your marketing material. So in this question, we are articulating the problem that your product solves. So everything solves a problem, but sometimes it's hard to see it. So for some of you guys, it's going to be super obvious, right? Like, I make buckwheat snacks because there are people who are celiac who want crunchy, snackable treats as well, right? And so for others, it might be harder to articulate. So you need to think hard here. What does your product provide for your audience? So you might be something like more of a gift, right? You might be a high-end caramel company that people buy for giving, and you might be solving the problem for people to give hosts who don't like chocolate, right? Or maybe you're providing a caramel that has a softer texture and doesn't get stuck in your teeth for people who don't like that sticky caramel, right? So it doesn't matter if the problem that you're solving seems silly. If someone has a concern and you are filling their need, you are solving a problem. Charlie, what problem? I'm going off script here, but what problem are you solving with Element Shrub?
Well, the problem that we were solving was when literally, like when my wife was pregnant, she was looking for a drink that was made with real ingredients, didn't have a ton of sugar, and no alcohol, right?
Yeah.
Because she was pregnant and wanted something that had like the complexity of a cocktail, um, but it was kind of more interesting, and
Yeah.
it was made with real ingredients and wasn't a soda or a juice or something else. And I think we came up with flavor combinations that were really kind of unique and adventurous because we found that that's sort of the type of consumer that we had, right?
Yeah.
That were more interested in trying something new, trying something different. So
Yeah. And Charlie, I think you'll agree with me that so often with the emerging brands that we work with, they develop a product just like you and your wife did that solve their own needs first. We see this a lot.
totally. Yep.
Yeah. So as you're developing your product, you need to identify this problem and the solution in order to develop a product that your customers reach to again and again. So like I said, people buy brands, not product lines. People buy solutions, and your brand has to identify exactly what that is for your particular audience. So from there, we turn to answering the question, why am I different? So you can also phrase it like this: why am I better? What makes you better than your competition? What makes you different, right? So here we want to make sure that you are looking beyond the obvious. It's not just your tastes. So what skill set do you have outside of the packaged product industry? And how can those skills be used in your business? So are you super social and great on camera? Then your virtual pitches and your Zoom happy hours and your Instagram lives are going to rock. Or maybe you're fantastic at math. Then great, your financials are going to be super solid. Or were you a physician in your past career? Put that healthy spin on your product line, right? So from there, you share your reason why you're better, why you're different with your audience. So let me give you an example here. You might say, our kitchen, while in our home, has been certified nut and gluten-free, while lots of homemade snacks can't say that. We also buy our fruit farm direct from small family-owned farms in California, and we use maple syrup from our family farms instead of high fructose corn syrup or cane sugar. We're also better because we stand behind our product 100%. If you or your kids don't enjoy it, we want to know, we want to solve the problem, and we want to make it right. So you want to be that articulate about why you're different and better from similar products in your category. Because if you can't highlight the difference between you and the product next to you on the shelf, your audience certainly can't either. You've got to shout it from the rooftops so your audience will know that your brand is the best brand for them. I like that you're nodding along, Charlie.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm thinking about, like, if you think about products as a commodity, right? Like,
Yep.
there are tons of different, like, I don't know, ice creams out there, right?
Yeah.
And like, yeah, in theory, they're all ice cream. So like, how can you be different? You're just like
Yeah.
people that like ice cream, but like, clearly there is, there's room for so many brands on the shelf that target different kinds of people, right? That want different
Absolutely.
things, that want different solutions, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
like no sugar or like indulgence, like super indulgence, or
Creamy or
like
like
weird
chunky or
flavors. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, dairy free, absolutely. So Charlie, you're totally queuing me up here for this topic of target audiences. So if you have done any sort of branding work in the past, it is likely included an exercise around this, and for good reason. So like Charlie said, your target audience is that person whose problems you magically solve. It's that person who feels completely, utterly obsessed with your brand and who's your biggest fan. So here's where the challenge comes up. The most common response that we get to this question of who is your target audience is everyone. Everyone loves my product, right? Everyone loves ice
Yes.
cream and anyone can eat it. So that makes everyone my target audience, right? And that's not true. I know why our audience thinks this, Charlie. Like I know why our retail ready students think this, right? They think the bigger my audience, the higher sales I'll have. And again, this isn't true. And here's why. So we agreed that people buy brands, not product lines. We agree that people buy solutions to their problems, even if their problem is something as basic as I'm buying this purse-sized metal straw so I can reduce the number of plastic straws that I use each week, right?
Totally.
So
Yeah.
you want to get super specific here. So I always use the example of smoothies. So if you have seen Charlie and me talk about this in the past, it is, keep on listening because it is worth repeating here. So say, for example, you make a low carb, high protein bottled smoothie. I love using smoothies here because just like that ice cream example, so many different types of people like juice and smoothies. And obviously anyone can technically drink a smoothie, but you've got to get clear on who your brand is really targeting. So for example, maybe you are targeting Rachel, the 30-year-old who just went to SoulCycle and buys your product on her way to her fancy job at a PR firm in Los Angeles. Or maybe it's Bob, who's like 70 and diabetic and struggling to control his weight, living in New Hampshire. Or maybe it's Mike, the 21-year-old college student in Florida who does CrossFit 5 days a week and stocks his dorm fridge with your smoothies. So Rachel, Bob, and Mike all drink smoothies and they all love them. But Rachel, Bob, and Mike all have different needs, styles, opinions on their daily smoothies. Their smoothies solve different problems in their lives. So once you identify your target audience, it helps you with all of your branding and your messaging moving forward. If you were appealing to Rachel, the Soul Cycle lady, you might have packaging with clean, fresh colors and play up the amount of local fruit in her smoothie. You are solving the problem of needing a convenient post workout meal that she can access in downtown LA. So if it's Bob, that older diabetic man, you play up the convenience factor and the weight control element, with single serve portions. You're going to make packaging that's really easy to open, and you are solving his health problems. And then if it's Mike, your packaging is likely going to be much more masculine with darker colors and an emphasis on the protein and muscle building qualities. So you're providing that post workout recovery drink for Mike. He doesn't have a kitchen, right? Remember, he's a college student in a dorm. So you are a welcome solution for someone with a mini fridge. So just think about it. That muscle milk drink looks very different than the Rebel ready to drink beverage than an Ensure smoothie or a Slim Fast drink or Project Juice, right? But at the end of the day, the product itself might not be all that different, but the branding, the messaging, and the marketing is. So once you have the target person in mind, it will guide you on your business decisions moving forward. You can run each business decision through your target audience filter, and you'll know exactly whether or not it's the right move for your business at this time. So let's wrap this up here. People buy brands which they feel personally connected to. By identifying the problem that you're solving, why you're better, and narrowing your target audience, you're going to attract that more loyal following, and you're going to build long-term fans and more consistent sales. So once you've got your hypothesis on each, it's time to validate and test your offer and see how your brand resonates with your assumed target audience, not just your friends and family. So of course, branding is this ever evolving process, and it's one that you're going to revisit time and time again as your business grows. It's rarely this one and done task that you check off, but those are the key questions that will get you moving in the right direction. So from here, the next step is digging into your financials.
Yeah, so financials are super important. I just wanted to say one other thing here on the brand. I think that's really interesting, right? Is that the once you really like kick off your brand, right? Your product line that is a brand, people start talking about the brand aspects of your product, right? And remember, like, and I always, and this isn't a food example, but I always think of like Tom's shoes, right? Like shoes are clearly a commodity, right? But like Tom's was the first people, like I think, like one of the first brands that had like a mission behind their shoes. And, I would say that like I've purchased Tom's before, not because of the shoes, but because of like the mission behind their brand, right? Yes, like their shoes are great. Like, are they the best quality shoes in the world? No, but like there's a reason that I'm purchasing them that doesn't have anything to do with their product line, right?
Yeah.
And that's where that you see that like difference. And that's where you see people start like, you see your brand growing because of you found this niche that may not have anything to do with your product line per se, but is really kind of an interesting differentiating factor about your brand that makes you different from your competition.
Charlie, that's such a great example because you could walk into almost any shoe store and find a canvas slip-on shoe, right?
Totally.
Like,
yeah.
You can walk into Target and find a canvas slip-on shoe, but people buy Tom's because of that, because they feel connected to the social mission, right? And like that Target, Target branded slip-on just doesn't have that same emotional connection. Sure, there's an audience for the Target slip-on. Like some people want that.
I mean, just like the smoothies, right? Like, yeah.
Exactly. Oh, that's such a great example, Charlie. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay. So obviously, like having a product line, having a brand, super important. But I think even maybe more important, I would argue, is, and I think it's something that's often overlooked when determining whether you should start a business, continue working on your business, or even like shutting your business down, has a lot to do with your financial situation, right? And, thinking back to what we talked about earlier, right? Like what makes you different, right? Like, well, if you're like an ex hedge fund person that has an extra like $10 million and you can start a business, that's going to set you apart from somebody that's trying to start the same business that's going to bootstrap it and has, $5,000 to start that business, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, anyway, I know this like seems kind of obvious that like, of course you should know your numbers, but I think, I don't know. I mean, I'm more familiar with the food business than others, but I feel like people get so passionate about like their product, like, oh, this is my grandmother's recipe. Like, I have to make this, or like, she's going to be upset or whatever. Or like, oh, but like my mom loves this. Like, we have to make it. And honestly, sometimes people like forget about like the actual business side of running their business, right?
Totally. Totally. Charlie, we see this all the time in Retail Ready. Like brands realize like 3 years into their business that they've just created a very expensive hobby.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, I'm gonna walk through like high level, like a couple things to think about here. But one thing you should absolutely figure out before you get started is, and again, I know this seems super obvious, but like, how much is it going to cost to produce your product, right? And now I know a lot of you are like, hey, like, oh, like I make a hot sauce from peppers in my garden, and like it only takes me like an hour to throw everything together, but like you need to account for everything, right? So, and be sort of like, I guess use numbers that are like a little bit higher than you expect, right? Just to make sure you're covering everything, right? But you want to include your ingredients, right? So all of the ingredients you use, even if you're like using salt and pepper, and like if it's just like a whatever
Sprinkle
of pepper, a sprinkle, your hard goods, right? So if you pack your product in a bottle or a plastic container or a box or whatever it is, right? Like your label, like all of that. Make sure you include your labor cost, right? So now I know I've been there. Many of you who are like running businesses yourself, you're like, oh, well, I make it in my kitchen, or I make it in a commercial kitchen, and I don't have any staff that works with me. So, and I don't pay myself. So like my labor's free, right? Yep. Not true. I mean, maybe on paper that is true, but the reality is as you grow, right, you are going to grow out of that space. You're going to need to hire somebody. What is like the opportunity cost of your time, and how much would you have to pay somebody if you were going to go on vacation, right? And you had to make your product. You want to think about the box that you package everything in, right? Like that's not free. You want to think about the shipping cost of the ingredients, spoilage, you want to think about how much, like if you're making it at a co-packing facility in California and you live in Virginia, like, but you have to fulfill it in Virginia, you still have to pay for the cost of shipping it from California to Virginia, right? So I think sometimes that gets overlooked, right?
Absolutely. And Charlie, to clarify too, when you say like the shipping cost of the ingredients, you mean like literally like say you're buying ingredients from a supplier long before you even make the product or like take those ingredients and put them in the final product. It's calculating the cost of shipping the ingredients to you before you even start tinkering with it.
Yeah. I mean, you need that delivered cost, right?
Yes.
So like
absolutely.
Ingredients plus shipping plus handling plus I don't know,
and
if you're buying food from overseas, right? There's maybe some export or import fees or like custom fees or something. I don't know.
And you touched on this a little bit with the labor, but I think it's also worth highlighting with ingredients. Like I love this example of growing peppers in your backyard and using them in your hot sauce. So like you might say, oh, well, the cost of the peppers is just the price of the seeds or like the plant starts that I put in the ground. And like, it's like really, really low cost. Like these peppers are practically free. But then I think, here's a mistake that we see emerging brands make all the time, where they get to a certain scale in their business and they need to start buying peppers so they can produce more product. And then sure enough, they're buying peppers at like the cost of the vegetable, not the cost of the seed.
Like, I mean, if you think about a farmer, right? Like a farmer is not going to be like, hey, this seed only cost me like half a penny, so I'm
Yep.
going to sell my pepper for 2 cents, right?
Right.
No, right? Like they have to spend time watering that and fertilizing it, and
Yeah.
and so that's why a seed that costs half a penny, that turns into a pepper gets sold for $3 or whatever it is.
Exactly. And so I think one of the mistakes we see is brands, like you said, underestimate their costs at the beginning, because truly
Totally.
your costs are likely lower at the beginning, but fail to take into account, like, when I am producing at scale, when I am producing, and supplying all of my local, independent stores with my hot sauce, what is the cost going to be at that point, and making sure that you're bridging that gap at the beginning, right, Charlie?
Yeah, and I think the scary part is like, hey, like you think, hey, it only costs me $1 to make my sauce or whatever it is, and I'm going to sell it for $3, right?
Yeah.
Or $4, right? And then all of a sudden, like Target calls you and it's like, hey, we want to sell your hot sauce in 1,200 Targets across the country. Like, can you find a co-packer? And by the way, like we'll buy it for like
Right.
$2.50,
Like, we
right?
need it
And then
cheaper. Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you go and you find a co-packer and you realize, oh wait, like they're gonna charge me like $3 to make this hot sauce,
Yeah.
and Target's only gonna pay me $2.50. I thought
Yep.
my cost was gonna be $1, and I thought I was gonna make $2 on, or $1.50 or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And now I'm stuck losing 50 cents on every unit instead of making $1.50, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Charlie, that can be scary, right? And so I think it's important to recognize that, like, at the beginning, keeping it as simple as possible is important, right? So, like, how do you think
Totally.
brands should get going here? Like, just
So
a
yeah,
Excel doc, or like,
yeah, so I
how do you
would
do it?
say like Excel is definitely the easiest way to do it. I would recommend keeping it on a shared drive, right?
Hmm.
Just in case you spill coffee on your computer, right? So like having it in a place where you can access it, right?
Yep.
If something happens, um, and then trying to set some goals for yourself as it relates to your
Mm.
finances, right?
Yeah.
You know, and also thinking about like as you go through this process, right? You're like, hey, is this realistic for both your business and your life? Like,
Mm.
I think a lot of these factors, especially what makes you different, right? Like, if I am a stay-at-home dad with 4 kids and my wife is working, and you know finances are tight and I have to bootstrap everything, versus like I'm single and I don't have any
Yeah.
kids or pets or anything and a little more financial freedom, like that's a very like personal but like difference between what might make one entrepreneur excel over another one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think oftentimes people forget, I think early on when I was so concerned about like the competition, right?
Hmm.
And like, oh, like, no, this other company is going to steal my idea. And like, I think you often forget about all of the different like moving pieces that make a company successful. And it has very little to do with your like idea, right? Or
Yeah.
your
With the
like it
actual
goes back to that
product.
product line, right? Like the
Yeah.
product versus the brand.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that,
So
Charlie,
so
that's why we can have, I mean, literally like close to 1,000 brands inside of our student community in Retail Ready, many of whom make very similar products, and
totally.
it's
Yeah. I mean, there's
still
10 other shrub companies in
ex-
retail already.
ex-
Yeah,
exactly, and it still feels appropriate for us to, support and encourage all of them.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
So going back to these financial goals, right? Like think about like, okay, if your goal, like your product costs $5 to make, right? And you think you can sell it for $15, right?
Yep.
And this is one thing that I think people always forget is like, what are your monthly operating costs, right?
Hmm.
Because sure, it's great to have a product that is you can sell for $15 that costs you $5, but you might have one brand whose operating costs are $2,500 a month, and then you might have another brand whose operating costs are either 500 or 25,000 a month, right?
Right.
And in order for each of those companies to be profitable, they need to sell a different number of units every month to break
Yep.
even.
Yep.
And so you need to like figure out where your break even point is so you can figure out when you can pay yourself, what you can afford on a monthly basis, how to push sales more so that you can actually get to achieving your financial goals, right?
Yeah. Can we run through that financial example?
Yeah. Okay. So let's say you sell your product for you, it costs you $5 to make it,
Yep.
right? And you sell it for 15. And
Yep.
let's say you have monthly operating costs of $2,500 a month, right?
Yep.
So in that example, you would need to sell 250 units at $15 a month to break even, right? So you've got your $15 gross revenue times 250 is $37.50.
Yep.
So gross revenue minus your cost of goods sold, right? Which is going to be $5 times 250.
Yep.
And
It's
then
$2,500.
so that's 2,500. Yep. And then you have operating costs, right? So the cost of shipping, your web like platform, whatever it is, your email marketing account, like your phone bill, whatever, all of those things, right? That's 2,500, we said in this example. So then 2,500 minus 2,500 is 0. And that's now your break even. So when you sell 251 units in a month, you are like profitable.
Yeah. Gosh.
And it seems so simple, but like,
yeah,
I don't think people do it often enough.
Well, I think this is
or
truly like it's the eye-opening part, right, Charlie? Like people, when people stop and do this and realize just how many cookies or hats or napkin holders or pillowcases, like whatever, you need to actually make and sell in order to break even, and then to make a decent salary, like that can be intimidating. It
Totally.
can be, it's eye-opening.
And I think it's important to, I think what I see more often, I see people not doing this at the beginning, but then more often I see people not checking in on this on a regular basis, right? So like they might do it at the beginning, but then they realize like a couple months in, like they're only selling 100 units a month and like, yeah, that's okay, we'll get there, right?
Yep.
And it's like, okay, but like how much money do you have left until you are out of business and can't produce anymore?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it's intimidating to do because so many, at least the brands that we work, Charlie, so many founders are like, well, I'm not good at math, or like I'm not good with numbers. And I I think it's easier to like ignore it and put your head in the sand. And one of the messages that I like to give over and over again is that, the financials and the math is a learned skill that you can develop over time. And
totally.
If you're not interested in developing those skills, that's okay too. But you need to go out and hire a financial consultant, or pull in a family member who is a financial consultant or great at spreadsheets, or whatever it is, to ensure that you're set up for success.
Yeah. So that's maybe we'll also talk about like a couple other mistakes that
I'd love to
make too, right? So one is like not factoring in that cost of labor. So we talked about that sort of briefly. One, they don't factor in the cost of all of the middlemen along the way, or middlewomen, that take a little bit of profit or margin, right? So whether that's your distributor or your retailer or your broker or fees for spoilage or whatever it is, right?
Your co-packer, or your like
co-packer, totally.
Yeah.
They don't include the cost of shipping, right? When they're doing their ingredients, they don't include the cost of spoilage, right? So you make a batch that's supposed to make 12 cookies, but you only get 11, and like, okay, but your ingredients said you were going to get 12, so what's going on? And then finally, right, they don't set these goals for themselves or have anything to work towards, right? And then like, and they don't have a good grasp on their operating costs either, right?
Yeah. And again, like I think it's important to highlight that, Charlie, you're not saying this to scare people or tell people that they're never going to make money, right? Like you are an example of a business that 8 years later is making or I don't want to say it took you 8 years to make money, but like in business for 8 years as a profitable business. And like we see examples of this day in and day out inside of Retail Ready, but it takes that conscious awareness to ensure that you are a profitable business.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. Woo. Financials is a big one.
It's important. It's important.
It's so important. It's so important, especially like, and this is the last thing I'll say here, but Charlie, like how often do we have students who, come into Retail Ready, they're in year 3 of their business and they're like, oh shoot, I got to go back and do that work that I should have done 3 years ago.
Totally. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Happens
Okay. So from here, let's shift gears. We are going to start thinking about where you're going to sell your product, which is also naturally going to tie back to financials here. So the most important thing that we ask our clients when determining where they're going to sell is, where does your target audience currently shop for similar products to yours, and where are they already searching for the solutions to the problems that you're solving for them? Right. So again, I love, Charlie, like I like these examples that we're using. So I'm going to give another example here. And it is a little bit of an extreme example, but I want to do it so we can see it in action. So say, for example, that you make a whitening toothpaste. Where does your audience already buy dental care solutions? And where do they turn to, or who do they turn to for dental advice and recommendations and product referrals, right? So they're likely to buy toothpaste at drugstores, in the health and beauty aisle in the grocery store, or like in a box store, right? Or maybe on Amazon when they're running low and they need it delivered the next day. So they might ask their dentist for recommendations, or they might read up on reviews online to make sure that they are finding that whitening product that really works. And great,
like
right?
Farmers markets, probably not a good place to sell, right? Like whitening toothpaste.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're that whitening toothpaste and you like really go back to identifying where your audience is currently shopping for toothpaste, the solution is obvious for you. You would likely have your dream accounts include Walgreens, CVS, Amazon, or frankly, even better, sold at dentist offices, right? You would likely create marketing campaigns that get buy-in and endorsements from the American Dental Association, from influential health and wellness bloggers, and paid ads on Amazon or Instacart, right? So Charlie, like where else wouldn't you sell? Like I like the idea of not at the farmer's market.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like thinking like, I don't know, like an olive oil and like cheese store, right? Like where you would like go and entertain guests. So, oh great, like here's some olive oil and cheese. I'm sure they'd love some whitening like toothpaste as well, like in a gift basket, right? Like that doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. And I'm laughing because it sounds so obvious, but again, like I feel like producers so often just want to sell like anywhere and everywhere that sells like fancy products or like luxury products. So like,
totally.
You wouldn't sell in that like high-end gift shop or that luxury specialty food store. Or, I mean, thinking about other sales channels, Charlie, like they likely wouldn't pursue food service or corporate accounts or entertainment venues or restaurant accounts, because it just wouldn't make sense for your target audience and where they're currently buying toothpaste.
Yeah. And so, another interesting example here too, that I've used before is like RX Bar. Right. So, they could have launched at Whole Foods, right? Where I would argue like, yeah, sure. Like Whole Foods is probably a target part within their target audience.
Yeah.
But what their like core audience was right at the beginning was these CrossFit athletes. Right. And so instead of selling to Whole Foods and making people take that extra step of like buying it in a grocery store, they sold it at the CrossFit gyms where people and wanted it and needed it the most, right?
Yeah.
So it eliminated that gap of like, oh, like instead of putting an ad up at the CrossFit gym saying like, buy us at Whole Foods, right? They were like, here, buy it right now. Like you just worked out. This is what you need right now.
Yeah, that's such a great example of meeting your customer where they are acutely feeling that problem, right? Those
Totally.
CrossFitters are at the gym working out, and then they're like, I need my post-workout recovery, or I need,
Right.
my fuel for the workout, or like whatever they're thinking in that moment. Clearly, I'm not that target audience.
Right.
um, is, then like they look over and your product is there solving that problem for them at the same moment that they're experiencing it.
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
again, it goes back to identifying your target audience, the problems that you'll solve for them. So until you do this work, you can't figure out where your very best sales accounts will be, and you'll likely feel like you're spinning your wheels trying to gain traction everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So you guys will notice in this example that we outlined several different sales channels for our imaginary toothpaste brand. And that was on purpose, right? This is called an omni-channel strategy. And we see it work really well with packaged products. So that phrase of like, don't put all your eggs in one basket really applies here. You want to make sure you're diversifying your sales channels so that if one isn't successful for some reason, you're still stable. So one mistake that I do want to highlight here is that oftentimes brands assume that selling direct to consumer is cheaper, faster, and more profitable than selling through wholesale accounts. And so remember, just to clarify exactly what that would be, instead of selling at the CrossFit gym, it would be as if RX Bar stood on the sidewalk outside of the gym and was like, here's a bar, would you like to buy this bar for $3? Would you like to buy this bar for $3? So
Yeah.
remember, like Charlie outlined in the financial section, it really becomes this numbers and a volume game with packaged goods. So there's no right or wrong answer as to where you are going to sell your products to move the highest number of units, but don't make the false assumption that it's easier to sell direct to consumer. So we're going to talk more about that in a moment. But Charlie, I want to turn back to you and wrap up some of these key things that brands can think about, particularly when they're pre-revenue.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, like, not sure where all of you listeners are in the life cycle of your
Mm-hmm.
business, but again, if you're pre-revenue and you haven't quite launched yet, I know as a brand myself, I always love homework and checklists and things like that. So as a sort of baseline, right, these are like a couple of things that you want to have lined up before you go out and start like pitching people, right?
Yeah.
So
And
one
Charlie,
is obvious.
I'm going to interrupt before you even get into your checklist, that if brands are watching this and they've already launched and they're already selling and they haven't done these things on the
Oh,
checklist, it's not too late to go back and fix
no,
these
you're
mistakes, right? Like
absolutely true.
it's never too late. And I don't want brands to feel bad if they haven't done all these things, even if they're already selling. Because Charlie, I would assume that this checklist is made from all of your, obviously your own experience, but then also seeing retail ready students who forgot to do these things before they
Yeah,
launched.
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So, and I'm going to say, like, the first thing you want to do is make sure you know your costs, right? So
Right.
figure out what your cost
Yeah.
of goods sold is on a per unit basis. Hands down, that's the first thing you should do.
Yeah.
Second, you want to create a product, right? A product line and some sort of packaging that represents your brand, right? And so you're going to want to have, obviously, that final recipe. You're going to want to have at a very minimum, like a digital mock-up if you don't have a physical mock-up. But in order to pitch accounts, you're going to need actual product to show them what it's going to look like on the shelf. And then obviously you're going to need to go through all the health permitting stuff of like making sure you're producing it legally in a commercial kitchen or through a co-packer or all of that, right? Like, you don't want to get like 2 years into your business and like have a big account come along and be like, hey, we need to make sure that you are producing in a like whatever
Food safe way. Yeah.
SQ3 approved facility, right? You don't want to do that 2 years down the road.
Yeah.
Having a website, right? Like, I know this is super obvious. Everybody has websites these days, but like, even if you're not selling your product direct to consumer right away, right? Websites are obviously like a great way to demonstrate that you are like a real company, right?
Even if it's just a landing page, right? Like literally a
Totally.
one-page landing page.
And I would say even as you're launching, right? Like something that's really great is saying, hey, like we are this awesome brand, like enter your email here to learn more once we launch, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and if you're going to sell products online, I would say generally like Shopify is probably a good bet for e-commerce. If you're like deciding what to do.
I would say 99% of brands who sell online should use Shopify. Like we
Yeah,
see other brands try to use other platforms.
Yeah, and
then
Squarespace is fine too. You know,
Yeah.
early on if you really need like to just get started quickly.
Yep.
But I like we had, and we'll just say like we used Squarespace early on, and then we switched
to Shopify.
Actually, to Shopify as well. So
yeah.
You're going to want to have all your social media handles. So whether you're on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever, have those accounts like set up with your logo, have a little blurb about who you are. Think about what that social media calendar is going to look like. Now, social media isn't everything. So don't like, I would say generally like, don't feel overwhelmed that like you don't have enough followers or you don't have enough likes. Like that is not going to be what changes or makes your business unless, you know, some famous person like, I don't know, repost something.
Charlie, I think we could do a whole other, hour-long segment on social media. So I'm glad that you pointed out that like social media is not what's going to make or break your brand at the beginning, unless you're, a unicorn. We see it happen every now and then, but it's, it's very rare.
You're going to want to have like some sort of email marketing platform set up, right? So whether that's MailChimp or Klaviyo or ActiveCampaign, right? Like get something going so that you can start to communicate with your consumers, right? Having some sort of fulfillment solution, right? So this is, if you're fulfilling orders and like you finally get that first order from a buyer and they're like, and you're like, oh wait, like I don't have a UPS account. Like, how am I going to ship this? Or like, I just like sent it, I dropped it off at the UPS store and they say it's going to be $300 to ship like 2 cases of this product. And like, I can't pass that along to the consumer or I'm going to lose so much money. So try to like, just figure that out in advance. And also figure out like, if you are working like 2 other jobs and doing this, do you need to hire somebody to do that fulfillment for you? Right. So that people aren't waiting for weeks. Right. Exactly. Who's going to do it? Literally, like who is going to do it? So obviously there's a couple other little things that you might need here or there, but I think if as a baseline, if you have these things in place, you're in a good spot to like get out there and knock on doors and just like kind of get started forward with your business. What happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like some of the pieces of information or some of the things that you need are dependent on which channel you're going to sell into, right?
Definitely.
But we'll talk about that in a moment. So I think this is a good time to segue into talking about the pros and cons of selling in those different channels. So let's jump into one that I think that most people think, again, is going to be the best channel for them, but has a lot of challenges associated with it. So I hinted at this earlier, but Charlie, you want to dig into this a little bit deeper?
Yeah, so direct to consumer, DTC, right? Like, I don't know. I feel like in the food and beverage world, there's so many acronyms. So at the end of the day, right, to sell your products through your website, and again, I'm saying through your own website, not on Amazon, not on Thrive Market or somewhere else. You need to convince a lot of people, right, to visit your website and then buy products. And like, you're like, oh, like, well, like, I told my cousins and my family about my website and they're going to tell everybody they know. And then like, all of a sudden, like, we're going to be like crushing it. Right. Like it's not that easy. And just as a sort of like data point, right. Shopify they say that think the average conversion rate is like 2 to 3%. So that means for every 100 people that visit your site, 2 or 3 will purchase. Right. So is that if that's 100 people visiting your site a day, a month, a year, like what, right? So how are you going to drive traffic to, frankly, a new site and a new brand and a new product that nobody has ever heard about until, 2 weeks ago, right? Or
Yeah.
whenever you
Yeah.
launched, right?
Yeah.
And so is that going to be through digital marketing? Is that going to be through your branding, through press, like through social media, giveaways, influencers, ads? There's a ton of different ways that you can do it, but it also requires like a much different skill set, honestly, than like going and knocking on a door at an independent grocery store and selling your product, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's
And
like
Charlie,
a salesperson versus, yeah.
Yeah, and Charlie, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here, right? That
No,
it's really more about like what you're good at. Like, are you
totally.
good at digital marketing and like setting up that website and creating those sales emails and like all of that? Or are you good at making kombucha and selling it to independent stores?
Yeah.
No right or wrong answer.
No, agreed. But thinking through that and having a plan is definitely helpful.
Totally.
The other thing I would say is that when it comes to margins, right? I think we see this in retail already and just generally in the world. We find that a lot of people like, oh, well, my margins are better online, right? Like you hear that all the time. And so, yes, like in theory, right? Like going back to this example that we used in the financial model, right? Like if you make your product for 5 and you sell it for 15, right? Yes, your margin is going to be better at selling it for 15 yourself than selling it to a grocery store for $7.50, where you make, $2.50 instead of $12.50 or
exactly
right?
$10
or $10. Sorry. Right. So, but if you offer free shipping on all of your orders because you have this like feeling like, oh, nobody wants to pay for shipping, right? Or if your average order is 1 to 2 units per order, right? Then how are your margins in that situation, right? Or how much should you be charging for shipping? When should you offer free shipping, right? These are all really important things to think about that can honestly like make or break whether your online store will be successful. Right. And in addition to that, right, like, do you have a system for storing your product, right? Like, is it in your basement? Is it a storage facility, right? Who's going to handle to make sure fulfillment, to make sure nothing breaks, right? How do you account for that labor cost? How do you account the cost of shipping somebody a new product if it does break, right? Like, there's so many things to think about, right? I mean, there's so many things to think about with whatever you do, right? And sometimes people just like, oh, well, like see these brands online that are like look beautiful and they're crushing it, and they're like, oh, I can do that. Like that's easy, right? But these people are actually like pretty thoughtful about and intentional about what they're doing, right? And you need to do the same in order to like compete and to bring people to your site.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I talk about this on the Food Biz Wiz podcast a lot, Charlie, but that idea that what works well for one business isn't necessarily going to work well for your business.
Totally.
There always needs to be intention and strategy behind your business decisions. If you go and copy someone else's strategy, it's not going to work out for you.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay. Can we talk about wholesaling?
Yes.
All right. So there's direct to consumer, right? That Charlie just talked about. And then if you plan to sell your product through anyone else, that is considered wholesale. So whether that is selling at Whole Foods or a local independent store or your local gym or a bar or a corporate office or an e-tailer like Thrive Market. So wholesale is simply the term for when you sell your products to someone, they put their own margin on top of it and they resell it to the shopper. So at the end of the day, if someone else is reselling your product, this is really important to remember. There's still another buyer, a wholesale buyer or category manager of that establishment that you have to convince that your brand is worthy of being resold. And this applies to all of those channels that we just outlined above. So I'll tell you, this is exactly where Retail Ready students get the most value out of our program. So while there are lots of things that you need to think about here that are similar to when you sell direct to consumer. There's a lot of other information and things to think about that are different when you start selling wholesale. So let's highlight a few of them here. So you need to think through, and I'm going to run through this list and then we'll talk a little bit more in detail. So how can I convince that wholesale buyer to carry our products? Why will they say yes to my product? And what will I say when they come back at me with a no? What is that buyer thinking as they look at our product offering, right? How is he or she making decisions about what they carry and what they don't carry? How am I going to price my products to make sure that I have enough margin for them to resell it, and to still meet their buyer goals, right? Thinking about, do I need a distributor and can I afford one? Do I need a broker and can I afford one? Do I need a broker and a distributor and can I afford both, right? Once I'm on the shelf, how can I drive traffic to that store to make sure that people choose my product over those thousands of other products on the shelf? From there, what's a promotion schedule? How do I create one? So I'm laughing because, we're just like scratching the surface here, but there's so much to tackle here. And truthfully, no way that we can answer all of your questions, all of these questions that you need to run through on this training. So in fact, that's exactly why I did create Retail Ready, to help brands answer all of these questions. But let's share a few tips to get started and leave you with these questions to think about. So I highly, highly recommend that you guys come back to this recording, taking those notes and working through all of these questions that we prompted you to think about today. So again, let's look at a few basics around wholesale here. So first one, what do I need in order to sell my product wholesale? Right? Charlie, I feel like this is like the number one question we get on our social media channels. Like if you look at my DMs, it's just like, hey, Allie, what do I need to do to sell my product wholesale? Okay. So first off, on a very basic level, you need a sell sheet and a price list. And this is totally optional, but very helpful. You need a shelf talker. So keep in mind, retailers and distributors are looking for different things, right? So having separate sell sheets for retailers and distributors, potentially even for a broker, can be very, very helpful. So from there, you need to plan out your sales process or your sales pipeline. Right? We want to make sure you're not reinventing the wheel with every single account that you're pitching to. So how am I going to connect with a wholesale buyer and pitch them on my product line and actually get my products into their store? Here's where you need to, again, make that decision about whether you're going to sell directly to the store or if you're going to get support from brokers and distributors. Again, there's no right or wrong answer here, and you've got to figure out what works best for your particular business. So just a note on a high level here. You've heard us mention brokers and distributors a couple different times, and I want to clarify the difference for you. So a broker brokers the sale of your product to the store, right? So that is, they're setting up the tasting appointments, they get the buyer to say yes to carrying your product, and they help write that purchase order for your first order. So a distributor then distributes the product to the store. So, seems clear, right, Charlie? Specifically overseeing the delivery logistics of getting the physical product to the retail account. So often brands think that brokers and distributors are interchangeable, but they're not. And it's very dangerous and frankly, very expensive to make this incorrect assumption. So Charlie, where else do you see brands making mistakes here as they try to grow through wholesale accounts?
Good question. I would say one, not really understanding the margins that retailers take, that distributors take, and that brokers take along the way, right? Yeah. Because those vary depending on who you're working with, right?
Yeah, and Charlie,
or sort of taking blanket advice from people that are like, hey, this is the margin you should assume for this, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, because so many of our audience, and I'm sure people sitting on this training are like, okay, well, tell me what the margin's going to be. And we can give some guidance, but it varies by up to 30% margin, and that can make or break a business.
Yeah, and it varies by channel, it varies by product line, it varies by category, right? So there's a ton of work that needs to be done to really like refine that to make sure
Yeah.
that you are like pricing accurately, right?
Yeah. And certainly that's something that we can advise on brands like on a category by category basis, but I think it's dangerous to just like you said take into account like big assumptions about like
Right.
grocery
Yeah. I mean,
always takes 40%. Like that's
totally. And
dangerous.
I've done one-on-one calls with folks inside Retail Ready where they're like, hey, like I want to talk about my pricing. And like the first question I ask them is like, okay, well, what is your channel strategy? And
Yeah.
like, who are you trying to go after? Right. And then we like break it down so that they get like the most out of their dollars based on where they're trying to sell. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
okay. So not understanding those margins, understanding how promotions work and how much they cost. I mean,
Yep.
promotions are so complicated in
Yep.
the like grocery
Yep.
business, right? I would say feeling like they need to say yes to everything.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I know I did this. I think everybody's probably guilty of this at some point, right, in their career. Um, and and I just feel like it just comes down to like honoring your brand values, right, and who you are,
Yeah.
and yeah. So
Yeah.
so try to like force yourself to really make decisions that make sense for your brand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's okay to say no, right? You can always come back. If Whole Foods approaches you like 2 minutes into, running your business and you're like, hey, like, yes. And then all of a sudden, like you're on the shelf and you're not performing well. Sorry, like you're not going to get another chance with them.
Yeah,
So
that's your one shot. Exactly.
yeah,
And instead, you could have said no, like, no, thank you. Can I circle back in 6 months once we've dialed in you know, our fulfillment?
production. Yeah,
Yeah, our
exactly.
production and fulfillment. Yeah.
Cool. I think another thing is right, like get really excited to get on the shelf and then realize like they don't know how to get their products off the shelf and then
Mm,
they're stuck.
yeah. Yep.
Um, and then I would say the last one, it's sort of this like weird little thing, but I feel like I talk about it all the time in Retail Ready is like creating a case size that's too big, and I'm guilty of that. So
I knew you were going to
yeah,
say that, Charlie. Gosh, that's a really great list. And I feel like if our folks on this training had answers to each of those questions or like knew those mistakes were potentially like coming up for them, they would be in such a better position than the majority of founders that we encounter, right? And I know that we don't have time to like tackle in each one of these in detail, but I sense like the case count, the case size is really your like I'm going to call it your soapbox here because you are so clear on how to navigate this. Can we talk through the details of case size, because again,
yeah.
like you said, that's a question we get every week inside
I mean, I
of
literally
Retail
like
Ready.
answered it this morning on a one-on-one call with someone. Yeah. So
Yeah. So why does your case size matter?
okay. So 5 reasons. One, distributors and retailers will judge you based on how many cases you sell, not how many units. Doesn't make any sense to me, but like if you have a 12-unit case and a competitor has 2 6-unit cases or a 6-unit case and they sell 12 units and you sell 12 units, in the eyes of the distributor and the retailer, that competitor that has a 6-pack case is doing better than you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Having a small case size means, and I think this is a really interesting like pitch idea, right? Is that
Yep.
having a small case size means that the buyer doesn't have to like literally invest as
Yep.
much in your brand at the beginning, which makes it easier for him or her to say yes, right?
Totally. I mean, Charlie, when I was a buyer, I would have a purchasing budget. So like I could only spend so much money per month or per quarter. And so bringing in a product, frankly, that required less cash often was more appealing.
Right. Even if the unit price is like
Is the
relatively
same.
high,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I'd also say one, like, and I'm sure you can relate to this as well, right? It makes it easier for the merchandising team in
Oh,
store to like, if it's a
yes.
6-count case rather than like a 24, you don't have to go back and forth. And right, like
Yes. It
again,
all
you're
goes on the
trying to
shelf. Yeah.
right, you're trying to build a relationship with the buyer, right?
Yeah.
anything that you can do to help them so that they're not having to be like, oh, sorry guys, like I know this is a 24 pack, like blah, 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 right? Like that's just something they don't have to deal with now, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Having a smaller case size, again, this is another kind of interesting pitch tweak, is like, it allows the buyer, right, depending on their financial, their budget, right, to bring on multiple SKUs, right? So if you have a 3-pack instead of a 12-pack and you have 4 flavors, now like the buyer could bring on all 4 SKUs, which gives you more shelf space and more faces, and an opportunity, honestly, to see which one of your SKUs is going to sell the best. And it's the same price for the buyer as buying one 12-pack case.
Yep, absolutely.
And then finally, and this is a big one, as you grow, right, you're going to learn about refills. I have nightmares about these, but having a smaller case size in a free fill situation is going to be much less of a financial burden on you, especially as you grow in sort of bigger, like a big box stores. And as you grow quickly, right, like those can add up very quickly. So, and now, like, and there's certainly like a reason why like having a bigger case size makes sense from a financial perspective, right? Like, hey, this box costs $1. Now I can divide it by 12, and like it's only whatever, like 8 cents per unit. Whereas like if I divide it by 6, it's 16 cents a unit. So I get that, but think about these other 5 reasons and how much they could improve everything else in your business, and like what that pro con thing is. So
there's like an art to finding that balance.
Totally.
And again, it like goes back to having a strategy instead of just winging it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm hoping by now, as we wrap up this presentation, that you guys can see that there are so many things to consider as you think through your packaged product business. It goes way beyond making a product that your friends and family love and that they encourage you to sell. So Charlie, I want to end with some quick next steps for those who are watching this video. And let's start with a fun one, right? So on the count of 3, let's both say one thing that we think that people need in order to get started and sell and grow with wholesale accounts. Okay. Are you down?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. So 1, 2, 3. Retail ready. All right. So as you can see, Charlie and I are both such enthusiasts for Retail Ready and for supporting brands in there. But in all seriousness, you guys, if you have been nodding along with today's presentation and you are ready to keep on moving forward with us, Retail Ready is a great place to find that support. You can jump on the wait list to find out more about Retail Ready at allyball.com. I'll put it in our final slide here. So beyond that, Charlie, what else should brands think through as next steps?
Yeah, so we touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but kind of with the 3 questions that brands should be asking themselves about their positioning, their audience, and their sales channels. But really diving deeper into a business plan, thinking about their financials, thinking about what that cost of goods sold looks like, and just sort of reminding you guys that are like, I don't know, our Retail Ready students, like we create a business plan in there, right? And it can be like a living, breathing document, right? It's not just like a one and done thing, right? And then, I mean, making sure you have your financials. And I just wanted to say, like, when it comes to Retail Ready, right? Like we have just, like, this is just, and again, like I'm saying this as a student, right? Not as like an employee, but when I joined Retail Ready, like what we've talked about today is really just like the tip of the iceberg in terms of like the content. But one of the other great things that makes Retail Ready so amazing is the community of like-minded entrepreneurs that are at all stages of business and that are willing to talk to you about kind of what they've been through. And so it's a really, really awesome like opportunity to get advice from so many different people that are kind of in the same world as you. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that, Charlie. I feel that too. I love our retail ready community. So let's see. You said business plan, financials, of course. And then lastly, I think next steps here would be validating your offer, like well beyond testing it on friends and family. So through blind tasting or consumer panels, farmers markets, pop-up events, your local network, and so much more. Like you can start to produce and sell and ensure that there's even an audience for what you are trying to sell.
And I'll add one caveat.
Yeah.
Like, your mom or your sister is probably not the best person to give you feedback on your product unless you've just had a really bad day and you need some like positive energy.
Some cheerleading.
Yeah. But I would say it's really important. And honestly, like, it's one of the scariest things you can do at the beginning, but like asking somebody that you don't know to try your product and have them give you feedback on it, right? Because this is something you have like built and like nourished, and all of a sudden somebody might be like, this tastes terrible, or like, oh, I hate your packaging, or like, why are you doing this, right? And it's hard, but like you need to take that feedback, like, and you need to internalize it, because that's part of that validation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that you added that in, Charlie. Okay, so with that, I'm going to end today's training. So thank you guys so much for joining us. I hope that we helped shed some light on all of the things that you need to consider as you launch and grow your packaged product business. I mean, there are so many ways to succeed in this industry, and there are even more ways to stumble. So please keep in touch should you need support along the way. Again, find us directly at allyball.com, and we hope to watch you and your business grow. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, everyone.